Every day you and I get bombarded with negative news. Just like the body becomes what we eat, the mind becomes what we're putting in. It is important to listen to stories that not only gives you hope, but also inspires you and uplifts you. In this podcast, we're interviewing experts who will break down the solutions to the world's most pressing problems. And I promise you, if you listen to this podcast, you will not only stay informed, but you will also feel more energy in your life. Welcome to Great.com Talks with. Great.com is a philanthropical project where we're donating 100% of our profit towards the most effective cause areas like protecting the rainforest, protecting the climate by funding climate change technology. And the topic of today is tribal colleges and universities, a way for American Indian students to access higher education. And to understand more about this, we have invited Dina Horwedel and Cheryl Crazible from American Indian College Fund. Dina is the Director of Public Education and Cheryl Crazible is the President. So I want to say welcome Dina and Cheryl to this interview.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're glad to be here.
The first question goes to you, Dina. Could you help us just get a taste or a little sample on what's the difference when we speak about tribal colleges and education? What's the difference between other colleges?
Well, tribal colleges and universities are accredited higher education institutions that are located on or near Indian reservations that provide access to a higher education to people who might not otherwise have the opportunity to attend college due to distance from higher education. They're affordable, but the biggest difference is that they are culturally appropriate. So they're steeped in Native American identity, culture, spirituality, and the whole mission of the institution is surrounded around Native identity.
So I guess the only option actually for American Indians would be to attend one of those colleges if you want to access higher colleges, or at least a good option.
Native people can attend any college or university in the United States, but these institutions are different in that they were chartered by their tribal nations to serve tribal communities. So the whole purpose of a tribal college and university is really to provide a higher education for Native people so that they can then serve their communities. Native people can attend any tribal college, any university in the United States. Cheryl can speak really well to that, as Cheryl is a former tribal college president and actually got her start in her community on the Rosebud Reservation at Sinteglashka University. So I would love to hear more about what Cheryl says about that.
Yeah, feel free, Cheryl.
Yeah, thank you, Dina and Spirit. Tribal colleges and universities are really a revolutionary experience in American higher education. These institutions emerged out of an intention in the community that Native students would be able to access higher education that really strengthened and honored their identity. And about the same time that tribal colleges emerged, you saw a rise in American colleges and universities of Native studies programs. So there was this complementary experience in American higher education where they tried to create a climate where Native students would have a good higher education experience. But tribal colleges are really the institutions that are place-based. The issues that you're dealing with, like climate, they occur in place. And so tribal colleges and universities really create that climate environment for students to, as one of my friends used to say up at Northwest, Indians go to school with Indians at tribal colleges. Indians don't study Indians at tribal colleges. They go to school together and really transform their communities together.
Makes sense, right? Yeah, makes sense. It would. So let me ask you, what would be the Cheryl? Do you see a problem that American Indian College Fund is helping to solve? What would you say that would be?
Yeah, so the American Indian College Fund, I believe we address two things. One is creating services that increase the likelihood that students will complete college at both tribal colleges and at what we call predominantly white institutions or mainstream institutions by giving students scholarship support, because financial resources are often a barrier to attending college, and by also providing them with support services because they don't have a lot of experience with higher education. Then we give them some resources to kind of overcome that lack of experience. And then the other problem, I guess in quotes, that we would be addressing is the need for increased capacity at these place-based institutions. We support institutions with what we call mission-focused programming. So institutions have two missions. One is to train people for jobs and opportunities in their communities. And then the other is to promote cultural revitalization. So the College Fund works with providing resources to the tribal colleges and universities so they can do their mission work.
So increase the likelihood that students attend a higher education, and to increase the amount of people who can get a place on these universities and colleges.
Yeah, yes, increase the likelihood that they'll attend and remove financial barriers to their attendance and remove other kinds of barriers that exist. For example, they might not know how to navigate a classroom or how to interact with a faculty member, or even maybe what career they think that they want to pursue. So the College Fund helps students navigate that environment as well.
And if I read on the website that a high percent of the population of the American Indians are quite young, so I guess that would be an important topic to give. I think it said 42% of the population are 24 years or younger.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about that when it comes to, I guess, like me not growing up being a native. If I'm not grown up in that environment, what is it that is hard for me to understand? Like, what is it that is hard for the other society to understand about education around Native Americans?
Yeah, so I think it's safe to say that Indigenous peoples in the United States are very diverse. So the tribal colleges themselves are very diverse institutions. They, when tribal colleges first began a little over 50 years ago, they were creating a place where people could be trained as teachers, health professionals, people to work with natural resource management, all the kinds of jobs that existed in our communities. And the age of the students at that time was slightly older, in the 30s. And what we've seen in the last maybe 8 to 10 years is more and more young people taking advantage of college as soon as they come out of high school, or within a year or two after coming out of high school. So we've seen a decrease in age. So I just want to make two comments about the young population. We create a environment that is about the hope that young people have, that they will have better lives and that they can create better lives for their families. So the challenges that Native people in the United States face are incredible. Economic disparities, health disparities, a lack of access to quality housing, lack of public transportation. They're just an incredible set of social and economic barriers. But what we have is this incredible cultural richness and this really valuable worldview. And so I think tribal colleges, they facilitate that restoration of the hope that we can overcome these disparities by providing students with a good education and providing them with things that they can do in their communities. And then the other thing I want to mention about having the young population, it's important for people to realize that part of the reason why we have a young population that's so large is because of the disparities that our people experience. So people, Indigenous peoples in the United States, because of their lack of access to resources, healthcare, things like that, they don't have, we have a very low, average age of death, for example. In the Northern Plains, many people don't live to the age of 60 or older. So that's part of what's created that young population. And that's important for, I think, listeners to know that, that that's the other side of having a young population to work with, is that they're trying to address these disparities that have had this incredibly devastating impact on the quality of life in our communities. We see that right now, for example, with COVID-19, in having a very disparate impact on Indigenous communities.
You said, Cheryl, that the Indigenous people would bring a lot of cultural kind of knowledge and value to into the rest of society. How, if I ask you, Dina, what would be the current relationship that the Indigenous people have with the government of America or the rest of the society? What's the current relationship?
Well, as Cheryl knows, we've been working on a visibility campaign in concert with other Native organizations, in fact, and there are other Native organizations that have done surveys about the visibility of Native people in the United States. And for many of our students, they say that they feel invisible. They're not represented in college curriculum. Oftentimes when they are represented in college curriculum, it's not after modern times. It's just people are spoken about in a historical context. And in addition, we have issues in the country, as you may have read about, with what we call fetishization of Native peoples through using images as mascots and that kind of thing. And so people don't have a true understanding, I think, in mainstream society of who Native peoples are, their histories. It's definitely something that we're working on at the American Indian College Fund as part of an equity initiative in which we are trying to create greater visibility of Native people on mainstream campuses, in addition to, of course, what's happening on our tribal college campuses, so that people can understand the full context of who Native people are, what their historical contributions are, and so that they can be seen and respected and take place and have a voice in American culture and in an American society.
So I guess that would be going back to all instances of society, like infrastructure. If one group would be invisible, it would not be taken in consideration when you're building. So that's just an example of how this would showcase in reality. As you're saying that this would be the experience of someone going to college, it's similar there. You would feel like your background doesn't are not reflected in.
Exactly. Oftentimes too, students say that they don't see role models in the institutions. They don't see Native professors. They don't see Native people in the higher administration. Native people aren't part of the boards of trustees or regents at institutions. And in addition, Native nations aren't consulted when, for example, about community issues impacting that institution. They are not consulted about curriculum. There's a wealth of information, history, ways that Native people can participate in those spaces, and they're not included. We're seeing that right now in the country. You've probably read about the Black Lives Matter movement with African American people. And the same is true of Native people. We're asking that Native people be part of institutions and be considered and brought into the fold, and their voices be listened to and not just dictated to.
Yeah, makes sense when you mention it in those categories. Like it's similar problems that Life Matters are facing. I guess women have been facing this for a long time in just a whole of society as well, and children, I guess, as well. Um, Cheryl, you spoke a little bit about that you have different programs, I guess. Tell us more about the American Indian College Fund. Like, help us understand what is that really, and how does that fit into the picture of being that voice for natives.
Mhm. So the American Indian College Fund's focus since its founding over 30 years ago has been post-secondary success, right? Filling that gap that I mentioned earlier. And so some of the ways that the College Fund has supported that has been to, so we are bringing private sector dollars um, into the mix here. So the tribal colleges, they're mostly rural, reservation-based institutions. So they don't have access to donors. They don't have access to people who can give them resources to support their work. So the College Fund has helped the tribal colleges build buildings and support their infrastructure on their campuses, build roads, parking lots, libraries, laboratories, classrooms, student housing, all those things that people kind of take for granted in a college setting, the tribal colleges didn't have access to. So the College Fund, working with other partners, has helped them do that. We do programming, for example, we have a student ambassador program where we identify students who are interested in being part of our storytellers. So we teach them how to do this, talk to people like you, or talk to the news media about their experiences. So we really support students and the kinds of capacity or work that they're doing. We're doing programming like supporting Native arts and culture. So we recognize, along with some of our funders, that we run a risk in our communities of losing access to traditional art forms because people are concentrating so much on surviving. So the College Fund has been able to support people in the communities keeping and restoring traditional arts. We're even doing at the College Fund a lot of programming around sustainability. So right now we have an initiative that looks at the impact of grasslands in our communities. I think that's a really valuable piece of what the College Fund is doing, is helping people figure out, well, we're situated in this place. What do we do to manage the resources in that place? And then I think the last thing I'll mention that the College Fund does that, the visibility campaign is really important. And then a foundational part of that is research. So the College Fund has stepped up as a organization that is doing research about tribal colleges and universities and about Native students, because historically there wasn't very much research in that space. So a good example of that is that we know tribal colleges have an incredibly wonderful impact on people, on students, and on their graduates. And we did a study with an organization in the United States, Gallup Purdue. They do research with populations in the United States. And they worked with us to do a research project with alumni of tribal colleges that proved with data what we already know, is that tribal colleges are amazing institutions that have an incredibly positive impact on people's lives. They helped us tell that story with data for all those people who need data and not just the good story. So I think the College Fund is a leader in that space of helping tell the story with data.
Tribal colleges and universities are, if I understood it correctly, there's quite many in the United States. There's a map on the website collegefund.org where you can see where those will be located. And American Indian College Fund would be a supporter for all of those, I guess, for support function, as you say, to improve the facilities and help the students to how to talk about their heritage in the media, or that's kind of what I'm understanding, that you're supporting all of those different colleges.
Yeah, we do. We support, there's 35 colleges that are full members of the American Indian Higher Education Consortium, which is a membership association of the tribal colleges, and they founded the American Indian College Fund. Our primary focus is student success. So the primary investment that we ask people to make is in helping us help students individually and as a group be successful with whatever their post-secondary dream is, whether it's to, get a certificate so that they can be a data entry person or do construction, or get a 2-year degree and use that 2-year degree to be a paraprofessional in a school, or maybe transfer to a 4-year institution, or get a 4-year degree, or in many cases get a graduate degree and work in their communities. That's our primary focus.
What we're talking about here is a lot about experiences. It seems that to increase the experience that individual students have, and I guess that's quite hard to understand. You say that it's a wonderful, that you've now proven in science that it's a wonderful school education, and it's just hard to grasp from the outside. You have to be in the experience to actually understand it. So that's I guess this is a challenge, just how to paint the picture of why that would be wonderful. That's what I'm taking with me, that now you're, thanks to the American Indian College Fund, you're improving the experiences that the college students have. You're improving the kind of acknowledgement that the heritage becomes something valuable rather than neglected. And you're improving it's easier to see in real facts the quality that schools are having. That's some of the points that I'm taking with me here.
Yeah, that's a good summary, Spirit. That's good.
I would like to end this interview by asking you, if I ask you, Dina, or if you want to rather have a Cheryl answer, 2 questions. The first one for you, Dina, would be, what kind of support do you see that you would like after people hearing this interview? What kind of support do you need, or what would you like people to do after hearing this interview?
Well, I think that, of course, we always want people to learn more about us and go to collegefund.org and learn about the work that we're doing so that they can become financial supporters of our initiatives, and our students primarily. Cheryl mentioned that it's so important for our students to gain access to school and graduate, and only 14.5% of American Indians 25 or older in the United States today have a college education, a college degree, compared to, that's less than half of the rest of the population. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Obviously, like Cheryl mentioned, the challenges in our communities, the financial challenges and that kind of thing. And so it's really important for our students to get financial support so that they can go to college. We offer scholarships, we offer programs that are that train them in terms of internships and mentoring so that they can then graduate and go on and succeed in their careers. So that would be my big call to action, I think.
collegefund.org.
That's correct.
And the last question then to Cheryl. Cheryl, if you could empathize one thing that you would like for more people to understand, what would that be?
That we still are here, really living in these incredibly rich place-based cultures. Even our people who live in cities and other urban areas are closely tied to our land and our identity. So I think the big takeaway I would like for people to have is that we are not historical peoples. We are contemporary peoples who have historical and ancestral teachings that guide us and help us live good lives. But we're here today, and people should make sure that we're represented everywhere, in jobs, in schools, in the curriculum, that when there's health opportunities, that the disparities that exist in our communities are addressed, that, you know, that we're visible, I think is the takeaway that I'd like for people to have.